On March 1st, Google's new privacy policy will take effect, and some folks have applauded the company's efforts to simplify its policies, but others, especially consumer protection groups, have unleashed a wave of criticism about the changes, arguing that there are major privacy concerns for users. Joining me now to discuss the policy changes and what the privacy concerns are is Marc Rotenberg. He is Executive Director of EPIC, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, an organization that is committed to emerging privacy and civil liberty issues. Welcome, Marc. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello.
So, Marc, I know that your organization filed a suit with the FTC last week regarding Google's privacy changes, and I want to get to that in a second. But first, let's talk about Google's streamlined privacy policy, which essentially replaces more than 60 different policies with just one. So as succinctly as you can, Marc, tell us, what are the changes?
Well, the big thing to understand is that there's a large difference between taking a large, complicated policy and making it more simple that we might not object to, and taking many different policies that were created for different services, provide differing levels of privacy protection, and leveling all that and having a single policy that allows you to move the data between the services. Google's doing the second. Google is using the change in its privacy policies to grant itself permission to move user data between services.
So essentially then it's removing the separation between YouTube, Google Plus, and other Google products then?
Absolutely, and that's a critical concern for users. In other words, your privacy expectations for YouTube may be very different than your privacy expectations for search or for Google Maps or for some of the other services.
Yes,
and
but Google,
our view is that
yes, but Google said that it's not actually changing what information is collected about its users. So how does it plan to use the collected information now?
Well, what it plans to do is cross-platform advertising. In other words, it will take information about what you watch on YouTube or where you appear to be going on Maps and use that to generate advertising on search, for example. It will have a comprehensive profile of the user across all of its services. That is a very fundamental change in how the personal information that Google is collecting will be used by the company.
So for example then, if you're somebody who likes cooking and you're Googling cooking recipes while logged into your Gmail, and you continue to remain logged into your Gmail and you switch over to YouTube, you could very well see targeted recommended cooking videos based on your search history?
Exactly. And when you keep in mind how many different services, how many different key internet services Google operates, that gives one company a tremendous ability to profile all of your activities across the internet. Now, I want to explain that if some users would like that, our view is that they should be free to opt in. There's no reason that Google couldn't give that option to Google users who would like Google to do that. What we're objecting to is that other users who may not like that have lost the ability to opt in because Google is deciding for those users as well, this is the way it's going to be after March 1st.
Yes, but so some of your concern here then is that users can opt out of these privacy policies. But should users expect to be able to opt out of a privacy policy of a company when it chooses to use its services?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is why we had to file the lawsuit last week here in Washington with the Federal Trade Commission. And the simple answer is that Google did this before. The Federal Trade Commission concluded it was an unfair and deceptive trade practice, told Google it can't do it again, and now Google is trying to do it again. So we absolutely think that users have the right to expect that these privacy policies will be enforced.
So what are some of your other privacy concerns here?
Well, it's a critical issue today for Internet users that they be able to have the ability to control the collection and use of their personal data that's held by these companies. We don't object to the services, and obviously a lot of the technology is, very cool and very useful. What we're focusing on is simply how their personal data is being collected and being used. And
yes, but Marc, I want to interrupt you just for a second there, because Google says that they're not changing the privacy controls for users. In fact, in a blog post a couple of weeks ago, the company said our users can edit and delete their search history, edit and delete their YouTube viewing history, use many of their services signed in or out, use Google Dashboard and our Ad Preferences Manager to see what data we collect and manage the way it is used. and take advantage of our data liberation efforts if they want to remove information from our services. So, Marc, I have to ask you, though, how do you respond to Google's claim here that that users are still very much in control of their personal private information?
Google is saying lots and lots of things that are completely unrelated to the points that I made a minute ago. They are not denying the fact that their intent with the change in the privacy policies is to consolidate the information they have on users across these different services. That is a fundamental change in how the company operates. It has a huge impact on the privacy interests of Internet users. There may be lots of other things that Google is doing that we're okay with, but none of that is related to what the current debate is about, and that is the proposed changes that Google will put into place on March 1st. That's where the focus has to be.
Well, and so you mentioned the FTC settlement and the consent order that happened last year regarding the now ill-fated Google Buzz. But is it your contention that these policy changes are not in compliance with the terms of that settlement?
Oh, absolutely. We looked at the consent order very closely. We looked at Google's proposed changes very closely, as well as their current practices. And we found several areas where it's clear that what Google is proposing to do would violate the FTC consent order. And we think the Federal Trade Commission has an obligation to enforce its consent orders. We think it would send a very bad message to the community, and certainly on behalf of Internet users, if the Federal Trade Commission did not enforce the consent order. And by the way, we would say the same thing with respect to any other company. It's not just about Google. It's about the privacy interests of Internet users and the need for the Federal Trade Commission to enforce its orders.
Well, so then is the lawsuit itself sort of a catalyst to get the FTC here to investigate the policy changes and to enforce, if necessary, the consent order from last year?
Well, it's at the very least a catalyst. I mean, we have a very strong legal claim here that the Federal Trade Commission, having reached a final order, which is the consent order with Google, and having clear legal authority to enforce its orders, is actually under a legal obligation to do so. That's why we filed this lawsuit. We actually don't believe that the FTC has a choice on this matter. We think they have to enforce the consent order.
Well, and I want to talk about the reasons for the changes, because Google says that the changes are being made to enhance the user experience by, in some cases, providing them with faster, customized researches or search results. But is this the only reason for the changes?
Well, I suspect that part of the reason that Google is doing this is because they are in a competition with Facebook over advertising dollars. And it has a big impact on what both companies are doing right now with the data that they collect. I won't get into a discussion of whether or not that's a good move or bad move for Google. My concern is simply that in announcing this move, it will have an impact on the privacy of Internet users, of Google services. And we believe that under the consent order, they're not allowed to do that. And as for whether there are benefits for users, again, our view is that if some users would like that, they should be able to make that choice. I mean, much of Internet is about choosing the services you want. And if something looks attractive to you, you should be able to do it. But to tell all Google users that they have to accept this or essentially stop using Google services, that just can't be right.
I'd just like to know more specifics on how they're violating the consent order.
Well, I should say at the beginning, it gets a little bit complicated. The consent order is detailed. We've actually identified 4, possibly 5 different ways in which Google is violating the consent order with the proposed changes on March 1st. But the key point has to do with what Google says and what Google does, because the Federal Trade Commission is very concerned that consumers may not be able to understand the significance of what Google is doing. And if you read the report that Google submitted recently, it makes clear that Google is telling users very little, actually, about the data that's being collected or how it's being used. Now, it's being very aggressive, as it says, in running ads and placing banner ads on websites and newspapers and elsewhere. But for a Google user to actually understand how much data is being collected or how it might be used or who would have access to it, none of that information is there. And that's a misrepresentation. That's something that the Federal Trade Commission typically does not allow.
All right. Well, we are going to have to leave it there, but thanks very much for sharing your insight with us today. We'll stay tuned to see whether or not Google actually tweaks its policy in light of some of your concerns here today, Marc. We appreciate it. Thank you. That was Marc.
Nice speaking with you.
Marc Rotenberg of Epic. We invited Google to join our discussion, but the company did not respond. For more information on this or other topics, log on now to BloombergLaw.com. I'm Spencer Mazyck, reminding you to be in the know with B-Law. Bye, everybody.